Yeah. They are gone? So what does it look like? I got a complaint about your house.
When? In May?
Sorry.
It was before the last council meeting, but they said it. No, I mean,
Yeah, well, they mow. I mow after they die off.
they sent me a picture. I know that house.
What's the other one?
You plug me in back
I know that house. Did the city cash my water checks yet?
Yes. You got it halfway through the story.
Yeah, I don't think we're that quick to get them.
I dropped it off. Early last week.
Good afternoon.
Again.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the July 10, 2017 Committee of the Whole meeting. I'd ask our city clerk, Sue Herman, to call the roll, please.
Jacobson? Finucane?
Here.
Marquardt?
Here.
You ready? Fagan? Noreko?
Recommended passage, please.
Verbeck? Favor?
Here.
Smith?
Here. Before we get on to the consideration for tonight's meeting, I would like to let our viewers and our audience know that Alderman Fagan and Alderman Verbeck both are excused tonight. One is on vacation, and one is has a personal situation with their family. We have no items from the regular agenda that are on the Committee of the Whole meeting, so we will move forward for our consideration. We have one of those tonight for the Committee of the Whole. That's a crossing guard services update. I'd like to ask our Police Chief Gene Lowry and Police Commander Jason Leverton to please go to the podium and speak on this item, please. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, staff, and community for allowing us this time to speak. What we're going to talk about tonight is the crossing guard services and some of the issues we've had. We're going to go through things like the historical information, what I call the evolution of the program that went from a fledgling 6 guards to where it is today at 22. We're also going to try and do a little memory refreshing for the council, just to give you a perspective on when this has been discussed before the Council and Finance Advisory Committee in the past. This has been a topic of discussion on my behalf since I came here with 2 preceding District 428 superintendents, preceding the current Mr. Craven as superintendent. So it's not a new topic, but it's coming to a focal point as of this day. We also plan on discussing a little bit about the drain on police resources that's occurred, some of the costs and risk we've encountered as part of this program. We're going to also go into the RFP process, and really we're going to revisit the plan because we're going to be bringing this back to you at the next council meeting in regard to a contract provider. And a decision will have to be made because even though we're working with that potential contract provider, we'll be on a very short time frame in regard to the kids going back to school. I keep saying we, and I'll be honest, that might not have been totally genuine because Commander Leverton is going to come up here and do a far better job than I could. But a little bit about Jason. He's been primarily here most of his career. He came to us with some experience out of the Freeport area. He holds a master's degree in public administration from NIU. He was deeply embedded in this program as a sergeant in managing it, so he really has a good handle on the nuts and bolts of implementation of this program. And we're going to turn it over to him and hopefully have some time for any questions to address with the council and anyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and add my word of thanks for the opportunity to provide this update to everyone this evening. Again, first of all, we would like to go through some historical information about the Crossing Guard program. We feel it might be beneficial to understand, as the Chief mentioned, the evolution of this program. In the meantime, since the authorization to release an RFP was granted by the City Council a couple of months ago, we had city staff do some research and to see how far back this program went. It seemed to predate all of us. I started here in 1996, and I knew that this program existed then and that it was managed by the city and primarily the police department. The oldest contract that we could find with the school district dated back to 1987. In 1987, there was the permission authorization for a contract for the city to provide 6 crossing guards. We didn't have the list of locations provided in that contract, but it appeared to be a 3-year contract that allowed for those 6 crossing guards in 1987, went to 8 guards in 1988, and then 10 guards in 1989. And although written copies of contracts, if they even exist, were impossible to find, we know that as of 2013 and to the present, that increased to a number of 17 guards at a total of 18 locations and 22 positions. And I'll explain that just briefly. There are staggered school start times among the elementary schools and junior high schools and the high school. So some crossing guards work 2 different corners. And there are presently 3 locations that use 2 crossing guards at each location because at the time those intersections are regarded as being particularly busy, both in school student volume as well as traffic volume. So we've increased to 22 positions overall as of 2013. The Chief mentioned as a sergeant, I was responsible for overseeing the program for at least a period of time, which would have been about 2009 to 2013, that I had the most interaction with this. Most recently, the amount budgeted for this program was $113,000 a year. That was the impact on the budget to the city. In or around 2009, the school district came to us and wanted to add even a couple of more intersections. And at that time, it was decided that we had kind of maxed out our responsibility or the ability to be responsible for this number of crossing guards. So around that time, the school district did start paying for 2 of the positions that exist now. As far as the increase from 1987 all the way up to the present, to the best of all of our recollections, it seems though just about every year the school district would come to us with a request to add an intersection or 2, and they generally did a very good job of plotting out which students walk to school, which neighborhoods going to which schools. And usually those requests were submitted as part of the budget for each of those fiscal years, and generally they were approved. So we have this incremental increase over the years that has increased quite a bit. In our last fiscal year, we spent an actual amount of about $103,000 for this program, but that's just for the payment of the crossing guards themselves. I'll speak to this a little bit more in just a few moments, but when there are crossing guard vacancies, since the police department manages the program, any vacancies are filled by on-duty police officers, and what we've seen is a pretty large increase of vacancies for a number of reasons that require a police officer to man those corners when the crossing guard isn't present. So secondly, as the Chief mentioned, we know that there was a finance advisory committee, a joint meetings with the City Council that really were looking to evaluate city services and the potential for contractual service provision wherever it was deemed appropriate and would potentially result in either a cost savings or efficiencies in service. And in the police department, of course, most of police services aren't really in the category of being able to be to be contracted out to private agencies. However, we feel that this particular program, since it is staffed by civilians, could be a candidate for that contractual service provision. What we want to speak maybe most directly to is the rather significant drain on not only police resources, but also resources of other city departments when it comes to the management of the crossing guard program. Certainly we understand its importance and the need for children to be able to cross safely. But as far as the management by the police department, that includes everything from recruiting crossing guards to making the selections and backgrounds and so forth, doing the fingerprint checks, providing training for them, managing the schedule, supervising them, and again, managing those shortages when there's an issue. And all this on top of the actual liaison with the school district with any issues, problems, or any shifts in service that are requested. In addition to the police department services, our finance department has done the payroll for all the crossing guards. Our legal department would have to process any workers' comp claims that occurred over the years, of which there were several, and there were several rather large payouts for medical emergencies and needs that occurred while our crossing guards were working. We estimate that there's probably about 325 hours of staff time that's devoted to just the management of the program each year, which is probably almost $10,000 in salary costs just for the provision of that management of the program, supervision, as well as our finance and legal departments work. As far as filling vacancies, when crossing guards aren't able to be there, again, some times there's illnesses that occur, there's family emergencies, it's been more difficult to recruit and keep crossing guards. Going back to the 2014-15 school year, crossing guards were vacant 181 times, which required police officers to be present. And each one of those times is a minimum of a half an hour of actual time at the corner. In 2015 and 16, that increased to 202 times. And this last year got even worse, 284 times in the 2016-17 school year that a police officer was required to staff an intersection because of a vacancy. And that spirals into other problems. Of course, we're generally pretty busy, even in the daytime hours. Maybe especially at school start times and school end times, we see increases of things like accidents. There's just a lot more people on the road as parents and guardians are delivering children to school. And if those police officers are tied up at those locations, then there's other calls for true police services that aren't always able to be immediately met, resulting for some of those calls to be stacked for later. So again, not the most efficient way to go about our call service provision. So the RFP process I'd like to speak to for just a few moments as well. Again, we came before the council a couple of months ago with this proposal to release an RFP for private contractors that provide crossing guard services. We were aware that some had existed. In fact, the Sergeant Hacker, who currently supervises a program, had spoken to a couple of them even in the past about the type of services and the range of services that they provide. So when we implemented or authored the RFP, we wanted to make sure that the RFP required potential service providers to take care of everything that we do now. So it included the recruitment of crossing guards, the selection process, interviewing them, and so forth, doing a background check, and we did put a clause in there that they would do the actual fingerprint check with us at the police department, but they would pay the fee that any other contractor or vendor would have to pay. They would be responsible for the actual hiring and also to hire a direct supervisor, and that the supervisor would be one that was familiar with staffing situations, personnel issues, things of that nature, that they would be responsible for the training of the crossing guards, all of the scheduling, providing all of the equipment to include the safety vest, stop signs, and cones, anything else they might need, as well as the payroll services, any human resources services, as well as providing documentation of the necessary insurance in order to take care of any claims that might arise. In response to the RFP, we did receive 3 responses, all of which on their face appear to be acceptable in that they are able to provide all of these services. Of course, there was a range of prices that were given by these companies, which I'll speak to in just a moment, but one thing we also evaluated at the same time as looking at the potential to have a contract service provider was becoming more efficient in the provision of the guards themselves. Again, I talked about increasing the number of locations to 22, and that 3 of these locations have 2 crossing guards. But what we've seen as time has gone by, that, for example, those 3 intersections that currently have 2 crossing guards, there's been some intersection traffic signal improvements at those locations. Since they are near the schools, for example, when you push the walk button, it puts up a red light in all 4 directions for a whole minute or even longer. For example, one reduction would be to reduce those intersections from two crossing guards to just one, since there's these improvements that have already been made. In addition, as most of us know, there's been some restructuring of schools around town, and what we found is some of these locations don't have near the need that they used to. For example, Cheeseboro Elementary School has closed. We were still staffing an intersection at 10th and Taylor, for example, that really saw very, very few kids. So what we are suggesting or proposed to our vendors was to provide us pricing for that total 22 intersections, but also to bring that down to 16. 16 locations, or 16 positions. That it would be 15 locations. There is one intersection at 4th and Taylor that has 2 times because of the schools in that direction that start at different times. So again, as a result of the RFP, we had 3 companies that provided us estimates for those. For that number of intersections to be at 16, Andy Frayne Services put in a bid of $93,287. Park Incorporated, $102,900, and All City Management Services, $106,330. Of course, Andy Frayne represents the lowest bidder in those, and we also found them to be somewhat favorable potentially over the other vendors, in that Andy Frayne Services is headquartered in Aurora, Illinois. It's actually the biggest company among all these. They have thousands of employees throughout the nation, but being based here locally gave them a number of very favorable Illinois references, including NIU. They've done services for the Convocation Center at NIU. Park Incorporated is located out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and All City Management Services out of Santa Fe Springs, California. So that's just a basic summary of the RFP results that were given to us. So as far as our plan moving forward, we would like to bring this back to the council for the potential approval of the contract on July 24th. Again, as the chief mentioned, we know that school starts right toward the end of August, so it doesn't give us a whole lot of time, even given the approval to work with the vendor that is selected potentially for this. One thing that we know that we have as a continued partner with this is the school district itself. Chief Lowry has met with leadership, as he mentioned, in years past, let alone more frequently, more recently. And we do plan on meeting with them again as soon as next week to give them some direct information about the results that we received about this. And not only that, in moving forward and how potentially we would like the school district to become increasingly responsible for the annual cost of the program. With prior school administrations, there had been at least some understanding that this was a pretty large burden on the city, and actually a little unusual for a city to take on so much of the financial burden, let alone the management burden of doing this program. So again, we would like to continue those discussions between the police department and the school district to potentially increase their support of the program in a financial way, so this isn't an ongoing recurring cost to us in the amount that it is. So we'd be happy to entertain any questions that the chief and I can answer.
Okay, let's open it up for questions. Kate?
Thank you. I have 2 questions. How many hours per day does a crossing guard work?
As far as the number of hours that a crossing guard works, it kind of depends on how they want to set up their schedule. Again, there's a half-hour session at each location in the morning and in the afternoon. Most of the guards do at least one location in both the morning and the afternoon for a total of 1 hour. Now, some, because of the school staggered start times, are able to work 2 corners either in the morning and or in the afternoon. So we have some doing as many as 4. So it just depends on their individual scheduling and how many they're able to pick up depending on the times.
And whoever is the contractor, would they automatically take on the current guards, or would all of those guards have to reapply for their positions?
Yes, good question. The way we worded this in the RFP is that they would have to extend an offer to each of the current crossing guards that we have. it would be obviously up to the crossing guards themselves if they wanted to, submit that application with them. But yes, that offer would be extended, so nobody is automatically excluded as far as that goes. And again, we're also requiring that they provide a direct supervisor. And again, even though in the past we've always had a sergeant typically that would oversee the program, it's not as hands-on as an actual supervisor whose only job would be to check those corners and maintain liaison with the crossing guards and the students and the schools.
Thank you.
Bill?
What happens in the event of an absence? Is there going to be a supervisor on duty in town that could step right in?
Yes, a very good question as well. That also something that we did address. The company is totally responsible to fill the corner. So what we saw with, I think, each of these companies is they have a paid on-call guard, in fact, maybe more than one, that's getting paid whether they're there or not, just to be on call if there's an absence. What we saw in particular with Andy Frain's services is if they are absolutely unable to fill the corner, which rarely occurs in the reference checks that we did on their company, they agree to be billed by the city for the actual cost to the police department if a police officer does have to go out there when they absolutely don't have a way to cover it. But again, in particular for Andy Frain's services, since we did all the reference checks on them, we found that rarely occurs, and that they never have balked at the concept or the actual payment of providing, for police coverage if that becomes necessary.
Thank you.
Yes, David?
I appreciate that we're saying that the discussion with the school district continues. Where effectively are we at with that? I mean, have they made any offer to meet us halfway this year? Or I know when we talked at budget time last year, the intent was to reduce it down somewhat this year and then hope they shoulder it next fiscal. Are we still on track for that, or?
Well, here's where it's at for now. As you know, there was an abrupt departure in leadership from the district, which did disrupt that timeline to some degree. So we did get set back a little bit in regard to that with the new administrator, the new superintendent coming in. The first goal was to first go by the direction of the council and provide a solid vendor that could provide these services without it being a burden to the city, primarily in loss of police services and the civil liability that may be attached to items such as workers' comp claims. In this situation, though, a few weeks ago I did meet with the superintendent, his finance director, and another staff member, transportation director, and I did tell them the intent of the city was to move into a process of negotiating where we're going forward with this. I also made it clear that there's no legal responsibility for the city to maintain this program, and that in fact it's kind of the exception in this business as opposed to the rule. It's a very difficult topic to talk about in just dollars and cents, though, because this is a program that protects our children, so we want to make sure that whoever provides the service does a good job. But we also know that times are lean, and when we are answering calls at an ever-increasing amount annually, that at some point in time something has to give, and this seems to be the best solution for us. To be more direct about your question, I would say this. I think we're a little behind in regard to where we could have been had there not been a change of leadership, but since there has, I think we're in good timing. We have a meeting planned for the 17th. We're tentatively scheduled for that with the school district administration. And Jason and I plan on attending the school board meeting on the evening of the 18th. So hopefully we can get caught up a little bit. First goal is to make sure that the council's comfortable with going to a contract service provider.
Sorry.
David, here's this new guy again on the block asking a question, but why would the school district, and again, I realize that nobody from the school district perhaps is here, but why would the school district, other than the fact that it is not our police department taking care of this responsibility, why would the school district not perhaps be pretty comfortable with Andy Frain, who, as Jason and the chief have said, have a pretty good track record of doing this?
If I could add to
Sure.
that, Your Honor. I did discuss that as well with the school district, and based on our concerns about the time frame, I said it was going to be our intent to come here tonight to give you a general overview, but to acknowledge that our preference going into it at this stage of the game of our review and analysis is Andy Frame, but we will have more information for you to evaluate at the next council meeting. But I indicated to them, I needed a commitment from them if they were comfortable first with contract services,
Good.
and then with the potential for this vendor. So I have provided them with information, and they have affirmed that they are comfortable with the contract services as a provider.
That was the what I was looking for. Thank you. Yes, David.
Is the contract assumable and assignable to the school district in the eventuality that they would want to take that service over? Or would that be something they'd then have to go back out and do?
I think the first step, because of the change of leadership and the timetable, we were really in a situation not where we expected to be. We're probably going to be in a position where the city will have to enter into the first agreement, and then we will have to negotiate with them in furtherance, but it's our intent to do so.
Yes, Tony.
So I do want to congratulate you and thank you for it. It does sound like a very comprehensive quote RFP that you put out. I mean, you're certainly looking to cover all the things that are being done today, and then getting quotes that came back within roughly the costs that we currently have today. But I echo what fellow council members and the mayor have asked already too, and this isn't against the police department, but we don't provide the buses to get the children to the school. We shouldn't be providing the crossing guards to get our children to the school. We do want to make sure that through this process we are protecting the children, and we're providing a service that is protecting them. But more discussion with the school district needs to be had, because I don't feel this is in our core responsibilities as a city.
Well said. Any other comments from council or any other questions of the chief or Commander Leverton? Any other closing comments, Gene, that you have to make, that you'd like to make?
I would just say, again, thank you for allowing us to give this information to you. I would say that one of the most striking things we found during this process is the fact that many of these positions have been added over time. Jason nor I, or I don't think anyone in this room can account for how. There never seemed to be an analysis of actual numbers, or a review of infrastructure improvements at different intersections, whether it's simply having an intersection be served by 4 stop signs, or a full-blown set of traffic signals that go to 4-way flash when somebody enters a crosswalk. And I think it's time that the type of analysis which we did, and it also included actual surveys by the crossing guards as to the number of children that were even coming to the intersection. So I think that's something we have to build into any program as we evaluate going along, but we have to get away from just someone saying, hey, we need a crossing guard here, and just reacting to that and make a determination what the actual need is. But it's our intent to work in concert with the potential contract provider and make those things happen.
Any additional comments? No one has signed up to speak to this item. However, is there anybody in our audience who would like to address the council on this issue brought before the Committee of the Whole? If not, I'd like to welcome Pat Fagan. Nice to see you here, Pat. There is no recess for the executive session of the City Council at this point, so I would ask for a motion to adjourn the Committee of the Whole.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded by Alderman Norrico, seconded by Alderman Fanouken, that we adjourn the meeting of the Committee of the Whole. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. This meeting is adjourned.